Come for a walk with me and let's find the site of the final civil battle fought on English soil. It's called the Battle of Sedgemoor, and it's thankfully not this way, it's this way. Come on.
The Battle of Sedgemoor took place on the 6th of July 1685 on the outskirts of a village called Weston Zoyland in Somerset. The walk to the battlefield isn't long or tough, it's just over 2 miles there and back and is flat all the way. And of course, as ever, you can follow this route on my Strava if you want to go and pay a visit yourself. I recommend you start off at the really impressive visitor centre in St Mary's Church. There's loads of background information for you to read up on before you head down to the battlefield. Fling 'em a quid as well if you can, as it's all run by volunteers for us to enjoy. Now, whilst we're walking to the site, let's give you a bit of background. The Battle of Sedgemoor saw the end of the famous Monmouth Rebellion, which was led by this chap, James Scott, the first Duke of Monmouth, and one of 9 illegitimate children of the then outgoing King, Charles II. So because of this, when Charles II passed, the crown didn't go to his firstborn Monmouth, it went to his brother, James II, who wasn't terribly popular given his Catholic background, as swathes of the country were Protestant. So, the Duke of Monmouth was encouraged to take the crown by force. Following some time in exile in Holland, the Duke landed back on British soil at Lyme Regis. His aim was to recruit as many men as he could and take the fight to his uncle in London. Here's the route he took, and in his first week he recruited 4,000 men as he marched through Dorset and Devon before eventually arriving in Somerset, where he was actually declared king in Taunton before securing a base holding in Bridgwater. They were subsequently declared rebel towns, and a fun fact, centuries later it's thought Queen Victoria used to pull the curtains across her rail carriage windows when passing through Taunton and Bridgwater because she saw them as anti-monarchist. But back to Monmouth. He went on to gather forces in the likes of Glastonbury, Pensford, Keynsham and Bath. But the Royalists were constantly on their tail. Militia clashed with the rebels 3 times en route, but were defeated. However, it did take its toll on the rebels, and the mission to take the roads to London was abandoned. Monmouth's troops dwindled further as some of the men were promised a royal pardon if they dropped everything and went home, which some did. Those that stayed loyal to Monmouth went with him to Bridgwater to rest and supply, 3 days before the fateful battle. Okay, so I've made it to the edge of the battlefield here, and I'm standing currently on the start line of what's called the Soggy Drove. And that refers to this track that you can see right here. Now, back in the day, that track would have led all the way to Bridgwater. For a very important reason, actually, because see here, around this area, on the outskirts of Bridgwater here in Weston Zoyland, the community would be mainly farmers, and Bridgwater was a market town. So what they would need to do is they would need to take their animals, cattle, whatever, into Bridgwater to trade and make a living. And to save themselves going on the road and potentially getting into trouble or danger, they would stick to these little tracks like Soggy Drove to make it easier for them. And this is where things started getting a little bit interesting for the rebels primarily. Now, it's worth pointing out that Monmouth's rebels weren't trained soldiers. They were tradespeople, they were farmers who believed that the Duke was their rightful king and was going to do good for the country. Meanwhile, the actual king, James II, was ensuring his men were trained and properly equipped to crush the rebels and punish his nephew. Once again, the Royalists were hot on the rebels' tail, arriving in Weston Zoyland on the very day that the rebels arrived in Bridgwater. The Duke of Monmouth was actually going to march on Bristol, but spotted the Royalists while up the church tower of St Mary's in Bridgwater, so instead he decided to try and surprise them. Now, it's thought that the Royalists were all camped out here. You can see sort of like the houses and the tree line there. That's where they think that they were before the Battle of Sedgemoor. Now, they came here because they anticipated the rebels coming from Bridgwater, which is just down that way, but they didn't anticipate them turning up as early as they did. So what did? They had a little bit of a drinking session. They got on the old Somerset cider because they'd been walking for days, they'd been walking for miles, so they gave themselves a bit of a liquid supper. But that didn't stop them from fighting the rebels. The tactic was to sneak over to the Royalists during the small hours, when the Reds were drunk, and surprise them. However, the rebel scouts got a bit lost and couldn't find a crossing point to get to them. Then it got a whole lot worse. A shot was fired, by mistake by one of the rebels, which naturally woke up the Royalist army, and the element of surprise was lost. Monmouth did all he could to take back the element of surprise with his troops on horseback, but it didn't work as planned. So, despite a hangover, the Reds used experience and greater numbers to overpower the rebels, most of which eventually had to flee. The battle was lost, and so was Monmouth's rebellion.
And here it is, the site of the final battle fought on English soil between Englishmen. 6th of July, 1685. 1,500 men didn't return home to their families that day. And it's them I feel sorry for, because what was this battle fought for? It was fought for money, power, and religion. They believed in something. They believed in the Duke of Monmouth. And he let them down, quite badly in fact, because what happened after the battle, when he knew that he had lost, the Duke got on his horse and rode away. He hid. And he didn't just hide, he hid in plain sight. He was found a few days later, dressed as a woman. Yep. And he was subsequently taken to the Tower of London and executed. And what of the people that didn't lose their lives on this battlefield? Well, if they weren't brutally executed, then they were deported. They were sent on ships to the West Indies. Hundreds of them were. And actually, there are still descendants in the West Indies to this day. It's quite a heartbreaking story, really, isn't it? Well, if you do come down here and pay a visit, there's a couple of things to note. And obviously, you've got the big headstone in the middle, which pays tribute to the men that fought in the Battle of Sedgemoor. But also, around it, you've got these four, almost look like railway buffers, don't they? Like mushrooms. Well, those are tribute stones as well. They're memorials to those that fought in the subsequent battles in the centuries that lead up to modern day. So starting at the back, you've got the Battle of Sedgemoor. That's another one to the Battle of Sedgemoor. This one here is dedicated to those that fought in the Battle of Plessis, the famous 7 Years' War, and the Battle of Quebec. And then they're all in chronological order. So then you've got the Battle of Trafalgar and Waterloo here. And then at the back, you can pretty much guess, that one is dedicated to the people that served in the First and Second World Wars. Now, all of these are kept in pristine condition by wonderful volunteers, wonderful trustees that give you so much information. There's so much information down here at the top of Soggy Drove, importantly at the church, which is the visitor centre in Western Zoyland. It's such a fascinating, fascinating place. I would urge you to come and visit the site of the Battle of Sedgemoor in the near future. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next time.